So, Annette, thank you so much for joining us and with Hamid to talk about the race to net zero. It's a word that we're hearing all the time. Everybody's talking about decarbonization and getting to zero, but it's used very loosely. So before we get into deeper questions and discussion, how would you define exactly what is net zero?
Well, I see net zero as really sort of the solution. So let me maybe step back and talk just a little bit about the problem. You know, we just have come through the pandemic, which we all know, and the thing that pandemic did for us is it really accelerated digitization. And actually, I was a little bit late coming to the green room this morning because I was doing a telemedicine call. So some things that have gone digital are not going back. And I'm healthy, so no worries. Everything's good. But some things that have gone digital are never going back. So we see this acceleration of digital. We also see this energy crisis that we're in because of the war in Ukraine, but not only. We had actually an energy dilemma and this acceleration of the need to really electrify. So, you know, if you add all these things together and just the social environment that we're in, where we're trying to retain our talent, we're trying to avoid the Great Resignation, we're really trying to make sure that we have the best employees in our teams, this has created this need for really an acceleration to net zero. So we call this panel the race to net zero. So what is net zero? Net zero is really the intention, right, and the modeling, the math, the equation of actually becoming sustainable. And sustainable looks like, you know, more electrification, more digital, right? And these two things together create sustainability. Net zero is simply really reducing, my mic keeps getting caught on my jacket. Net zero is really reducing the carbon emissions of your company, of your business, both scope 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, and you mentioned sustainability because that's also now in our vocabulary. Everybody's talking about it, whether it's in the boardrooms or whether it's around the kitchen table. Hamid, you told me that you've always believed in, a big believer in sustainability, even before there was a word for it. Why is sustainability so important to you, to your business, all the buildings that you have all around the world?
You know, I went back in preparation for this and looked at our annual report from 1997, which is the year we went public, first one. And actually in the back of it, we talk about sustainability, using slightly different words, but that concept. So it's really important. And I think that there are three constituencies that really demand it. So it's ultimately really good for business. Number one, our employees, particularly the younger generations, really focused on this issue. Mm-hmm. And today it's a race for talent. So if you want to be a good employer, you need to have a strategy around sustainability. Number two, it's your customers. I mean, 3, 4, 5 years ago, people looked at this thing as, oh, they're making me do this, the government's making me do this, the municipality's making me do this, I don't really want to do this. Today, they're coming to us and say, we need to do this, and we have no idea how to go about it. And finally, investors are really focused on it. So it used to be that maybe 5, 6 years ago, there were a few European, mostly Dutch, investors that were really focused on it. Now everybody is. So within the confines of ESG. So it's a really important vector for change for our business.
Do you find with your customers that they really are serious about it and they're doing something about it, or is it talk?
No, they're serious about it, and the larger ones really have very sophisticated approaches to it. Mm-hmm. But remember, the vast majority of our customers are small and medium-sized businesses with 1 or 2 locations. And they don't have a chief sustainability officer. They don't have big enough staffs to do this. So they really look to us and the other players in the supply chain to provide that to them. And after all, because of scale and reach, we can do a lot of things for them that they can't do on their own more economically and easier. They want to just go about running their business, but you know, they're probably supplying something to somebody who has sustainability as one of their top goals. So in order to get that piece of business, they need to show their credentials in that area.
So, Annette, you advise hundreds of clients all around the world. Are you having the same experience as Hamid? I mean, what is like the first question you ask these clients, and then what do you observe that they tell you, and then what do you tell them?
It's a really a good point that Hamid makes around what's happening with the supply base, because often you find that the supply base is actually 11 times the carbon intensity of your own operations. So if you're not decarbonizing your supply base, you're not really decarbonizing. We like to really talk to our clients about three things: strategize, digitize, and decarbonize. And I want to really, make the
Those
point.
are all three huge responsibilities.
They are. And a business has to strategize. Businesses have to make money, and they have to actually operate in ways that are, that are conscientious and sustainable, but ultimately they have to make money. So your decarbonization efforts have to fit inside your business strategy. Digitize is really important. One of the first things I ask customers is, how are you using your data? What data do you have, and how are you using it? How are you making the invisible visible? Because it's a really big step in decarbonization. And then we help customers find ways to decarbonize, either through energy procurement or energy as a service or microgrids or other ways of driving efficiency. I want to maybe make one other point is, we often overlook this concept of efficiency. Efficiency is the unsung hero. It's the negawatt. It's the one you never used, right? And so efficiency is really, really important. If we look at a data center, a factory, a building, we can actually save 15 to 30% of energy usage just through efficiency. Then you start really looking at the data and trying to drive more electric sources. We believe electricity is the most efficient vector of decarbonization. And then really looking for more sources of renewable energy, and then starting to decarbonize that value chain. So that's kind of how we work it through with customers.
Let me pick up on what you said about electrification, because you said, you've told us that electrification is the best path to zero. So tell us a little bit more why you think that, because there are other ways.
Well, we believe in an all-electric future. We believe in an all-electric world. And I think some of the panelists today are going to talk about traditional industries becoming more electrified. We realize transportation and buildings and all the things that really need to be electrified. Electricity is the most efficient form of energy, and electricity produced by more sources of renewable energy really, really obviously helps the decarbonization journey. Electricity is also, it's easier to transport. You can change the voltage, you can regulate it differently, you can drive it in different kinds of use cases. So it becomes more efficient. Now, I would say that, just as Jennifer Granholm would say in the Department of Energy, is decarbonization is an all of the above strategy, but electricity is the most efficient vector of decarbonization.
Yeah, Hamid, you've been nodding, and I know you agree with that view. I mean, how does that fit into your business model?
Well, again, I want to emphasize something Annette said. In order to have a sustainability strategy, it needs to drive the economics of your business. If you're just doing it for bonus points or marketing or whatever, it should come out of your marketing budget. But we think the only way you can do this sustainability is that you make money on it. Now, these technologies 10, 15 years ago, it was really tough to justify them because, it was a significant premium to traditional sources of generating electricity. But the prices have come down significantly, and now we have 365 megawatts of solar on our buildings. We're going to go to a gigawatt, and then eventually 5 or 6 gigawatts on our roofs. That's a major undertaking. We would have never been able to afford it with the economics of even 5, 10 years ago. But with today's economics, we can actually do that. And the same curve pattern that the solar panels have been on, we think storage is going to be on the same trajectory. And when those two prices become economic, then the whole equation flips altogether.
Well, beyond the economics of it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, maybe I can add that there's also new business models that aren't as capital intensive. So there's energy as a service business models that really allow you to not spend your critical, R&D dollars or your critical capital dollars on, decarbonizing, especially around microgrids. So energy as a service is an opportunity to, create no capital investment and get all the benefits of renewable energy.
But what I'm thinking, and to both of you, is, I mean, I can't really picture your buildings, going to an all-electric world with all the demands in your buildings, and of course you're going to put in charging stations in all of them now. Your communities, the homes and hospitals and other businesses, and not to mention all the electric vehicles that are going to be on the road. What is the ability of our current power grid to handle this all-electric world? Both of you.
It's a big question. I mean, everybody's going to plug everything into the wall,
Right.
and we're not building new power plants in this country, particularly in this country. So it's a real dilemma. And the efficiency point that Annette makes up some of the difference, but not all of the difference. Just to give you a sense, today our typical warehouse customer uses about 5 kilowatts per square foot. Okay? We think that's going to go 5 to 10x that level, because they're going to put automation in there, they're going to charge their vans and trucks in there,
Exactly.
all kinds of demands coming in. So we need to start building either new power plants and or more localized sources of producing energy. And I think solar will be a big part of it, but not the only part of it.
You make a really good point about more electricity is required. If we think about the last 40 years, we've used about 5 terawatts of electricity.
I don't even know what that is.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. But if we role play the next 20 years, it's 10. The 20 years after that, it's 20. So we're doubling, over the next 40 years, the electricity requirements. And at the same time, we're putting on more sources of renewable. And if the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, those sources of renewable are not constant. So you made the point about the grid. I mean, the grid has to become smarter. It has to be controlled with software. It has to become bidirectional. All the circuits have to become smart. And so technology and digitization becomes really, really important. And I would add one more point, which is demand response. All of the assets that are on the grid that are using electricity become very, very important. So disaggregating the loads and understanding, when to charge that device, when to, use that electricity, how to drive, peak shaving. I was, last week I was in Las Vegas, and I was with the T-Mobile Arena team, and they were thinking about a future where everybody drives an electric vehicle, comes to an event, is there for 4 hours. Maybe they're doing some charging, but maybe they're doing some discharging. And they're trying to help manage the peak of a stadium. That's probably not how we've typically thought about going to a concert. And so I think a lot of things are beginning to change as we have the technology and the demand response, which is really important in the future grid.
A very complex problem to solve and fix, and for the good reasons. And I wanted to ask both of you, what your view of this Inflation Reduction Act, the so-called climate change bill, play into all of this. I mean, to what extent is that going to help fund some of the stuff that you're talking about, and other opportunities for businesses? How do you see the future? You actually, let me ask you, because you've said this is the most consequential legislation on climate change. So how do you think
it is?
Play
it
out?
Creates significant tailwinds. I mean, it's $369 billion. Right, it's material in size. It's in law now. It creates democratization for access to renewable energy. I think that's really, really important, because access to renewable sources of energy today typically are, you'll see it in very wealthy environments. People, first adopters are buying electric vehicles and putting solar on the roof. But that's not everyone. And by the way, the first thing you need to understand is when you go to put in your electric vehicle is that your load center may not actually be ready for an EV charger. 30% of the load centers need an upgrade. So I think this Infrastructure Reduction Act, again, the most consequential, climate legislation that we've had in this country, It's important because it creates the appropriate tailwinds, the investment in the grid, and the investment in democratizing access to more forms of renewable energy.
I mean, how do you see this bill helping your business and some of your customers' businesses just overall?
Well, you know, a lot of these government programs, certainly in the past, have been ways of really amping up activity that was going on already. So I think with the amount of resources that are going to go into this thing, I think we're going to see a step change in innovation that would have probably not occurred. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the economics of the activity itself that are going to sustain that effort in the long term. The government can jumpstart it in a big way, but ultimately the numbers have to work for businesses to do more and more of this thing. And it is expensive. It is not something that you can do easily, and it's going to include solutions that may not be so popular to talk about. Nuclear has to be part of the fuel mix, for sure. And, you know, like Germany's reversing course because they became too dependent on gas from Russia, and now they know that they can't do this. California just basically reversed the decision to take the nuclear power plant off the grid. So I think it's going to be a mix of solutions. For example, we haven't talked about hydrogen. We've talked about electricity. Eventually, I think long-haul trucking is going to be probably hydrogen-based. So there are lots of different competing technologies, and that's a marketplace of ideas, and that's how things work. So I'm actually excited about it. The government has jump-started.
Yeah, a lot of challenges here, and I want to get back to the net zero part because a lot of these companies businesses have been setting their targets for the year 2050. So that's 27 years from now. What's the math on that? That we have 27 years to get to zero. How many companies are going to be able to achieve that?
Yeah, look, I want to make a point on innovation because I think it's important what Hamid said. Around 70% of the innovation that we need to decarbonize exists. We know it today. And if we kind of think about the formula, you know, 25% of our decarbonization can come from just efficiency, energy efficiency, the negawatt. Another 30% can come from electricity, making the visible, you know, invisible visible. And then the last 45% is really from more decarbonized sources, more grid management, more microgrids, more, frankly, of the work that you're doing for your customers. I think this is the formula. There is a fair amount of greenwashing. I mean, you have to model what you're trying to do, and it's actually one of the things that we helped your team with, Hamid, is really modeling the formula for success.
Well, I'm wondering about that. Is there a agreed upon, unified way of how you measure your progress? Because you don't know if it's a legitimate number or is it marketing because of the greenwashing that you're talking about. Is there a uniform agreement on how you measure your decarbonization?
Well, I think the closest to that is science-based targets, and I know you've committed to science-based targets.
Yeah, and it's not totally defined, but it's 75–80% defined, and that gap is closing. So, but I agree with you. There are a lot of people that put targets out there without having a clue how they're going to get there. And they usually put it out there past the next election cycle or past the retirement age of the CEO that's making the claim. So, so the key is to be able to measure your progress along the way and actually deliver on those commitments.
Mm-hmm. If I could make one more point, because I think we're seeing it sitting right here, is it takes leadership. It really takes leadership to understand, to model, to commit, to be transparent, and frankly, to compensate your executives on it and make it part of your plan.
Mm-hmm. And well, speaking on leadership too, is that for all that you're saying about the progress that's going on, we've been seeing recently that there's been some pushback on these ESG conversations, and now with this economic situation of possible recession or at least some kind of a slowdown, we've been seeing surveys and polls of CEOs who are saying that we might put this a pause, ESG on pause, and all this electrification that you're talking about, we'll reconsider it when the economy's better because this is putting a financial burden on our balance sheet. I mean, Hamid, I know you have very strong views on people who think this way, and I know, Annette, you do too. You know, so what do you say about the future?
okay, I'm going to get some criticism for this, but I'm a strong
Nothing has stopped you before.
I'm a strong believer in market forces shaping things. And I think there are two types of ESG. There are the type of ESG activities that people come and to conferences and talk about it and get credit and all that kind of stuff. And sort of it's a top-down, you've got to do this because it's the right thing to do, da-da-da-da-da. Or there's kind of ESG where it actually is aligned with the needs of your employees, your shareholders, and your customers. So by engaging in it, you have a positive rate of return over your cost of capital. Our investments today in sustainability and energy have much higher returns than our investments in real estate because the economics has gotten there. So as I like to say, and this is the part about criticism, I'm not doing this to go to heaven. I mean, I would like to go to heaven, but I'm doing this because I think it's really good for all our constituencies. And to just look at economic cycles as to where you turn these things on and off, I think that's short-sighted. These are long-term decisions you gotta make, and you gotta stick to it. But there should be always the discipline of return on capital, and it's spread over your cost of capital. Otherwise, sustainability becomes unsustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with everything Hamid has said, and I would just add maybe one point. You know, if you're a board or you're an investor in a company that is not working on decarbonization, what does that really say about the resilience of that particular enterprise? I mean, I would contend that there probably, if we cycle out 10 years, maybe 20 years, that enterprise may not be viable if they don't have some kind of decarbonization plan. So I think from a board perspective or an investor perspective, it's an imperative for the resilience of the enterprise.
You talk to so many CEOs and hear what their views are. You're talking about leadership. Is there anyone that you would single out who is a role model, who gets it right, and that we should learn and watch from this person?
I think, you know, CEOs are balancing, you know, are we going to a recession? Are, you know, what are all the challenges that our business is facing, our core business? And, you know, last week I had the opportunity to talk to one of the Moderna executives, the CTO of Moderna. And, of course, we know what Moderna has been going through over the last several years.
They've been kind of busy, haven't they?
They've been very busy, right? They've been, you know, actually not only proving but accelerating the mRNA vaccine. And, you know, Moderna is interesting because they have this philosophy that they call push past possible. So they did that in the development of the vaccine. And so one of the questions we asked them was, well, did you push the pause button on your sustainability strategy? You've been busy. And actually, it was a fantastic understanding of how the Moderna organization thinks, is they actually decided they needed to accelerate their sustainability strategy. So they didn't push the pause button. They felt that it was mission critical for Moderna to not only be, you know, one of the best vaccine providers, but to be the most sustainable vaccine provider. And that was the thing that protected their business the most. And so I thought it was a great example of you know, a CEO trying to drive trade-offs.
Mm-hmm. Hamid?
Look, the only constraint on how fast we're going to do these things are two things. One is return on invested capital. And so far, most of the projects we're looking at provide really, really healthy returns incrementally to our business. So that's really not a constraint. We haven't hit that constraint. But theoretically, after we pick the low-hanging fruit, we may run into situations where that becomes a constraint. I think that's pretty far out there, and I think technology will improve by the time we get there. The second thing is there are certain kinds of technologies where the cost curves have leveled out, like solar panels, and it makes sense to put a lot of them up there. Maybe the improvements are 1 or 2% a year. There are technologies like storage that are still on a pretty steep decline. So there are some thoughtful decisions you need to make about, do I do it now or do I do it a year or two from now, which is more economic. But those are all the normal decisions that we are all used to making about our businesses. So there's nothing different about this. For some reason, we've created the world of business and then the world of sustainability. And these two worlds need to come together because they address the same constituencies.
I was very encouraged when you told me when we were talking to prepare for this panel that you said there's been an awakening on sustainability, that more and more people really have accepted that it's something that we have to do. And I love the Moderna story, so it's a good thing to listen to. Annette, thank you so much for joining us. Hamid, of course, you're going to still be continuing the rest of the day, and let's pass it back to Tracy.
Thank you.
Hamid.